This is the BioCentury Show. Brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. In March, explore how to globalize Asia innovation and connect with key players across Asia's innovation arc, from India to China to Japan.
Hello and welcome to the BioCentury Show. I am Simone Fishburne, Vice President and Editor-in-Chief at BioCentury, and I am really delighted to be joined today by Sophie Kornowski, one of the industry's leading BD executives, successful women, and most recently CEO of Boston Pharmaceuticals. Sophie was at the forefront of deal making in pharma for years. Sophie, I'm not saying how many, but a lot of years, okay? And serving for 11 years in Roche, first as president of Roche France, and then as global head of partnering. In 2018, she left to join Gurney Point Capital, and then became CEO of Boston Pharma in 2022, leading it to its acquisition by GSK for $1.2 billion upfront for its phase 2 FGF21 agonist for MASH, another $800 million in milestones. Sophie, welcome to the show. I do want to get into the FGF21 field and your deal with GSK, but let's start a bit further back than that. Now, you and I have known each other for a time. I've walked and talked with you through some of this, but not all the way back. But after about 25 years or so in pharma, you chose to leave and then to join a small company as a CEO. There've been a few other people who've made that transition, but I want you to tell us from your point of view, what were the drivers? Like, how long did it take you to shake off thinking about being in a pharma, which you'd had most of your career, if you ever did? And I'll add on to that, were there things you didn't really anticipate when you became CEO? Talk a little bit about that transition.
So I think we have to talk. Thank you for the question, Simone. I'm delighted to be here, by the way. But we have to talk about the question a little bit differently, because I actually went from being head of partnering to being an investor with Gurney Point Capital. So what I was really eager to do was to follow the assets I would have done a deal on. And actually, when you're an investor, you not only do the deals, but you have to also manage the asset you acquire, the company you invest in. In Gurney Point Capital, we would take majority most of the time. So you were a very active investor. And that got me excited because it was a bit challenging for me to execute the deal. And as you know, we always say at Roche, the deal is only the beginning. So there you are, you spend 6 to 12 months of your life getting a deal done, and then it flies somewhere into R&D or commercial, but you really don't have your hands on it. And I wanted to actually be able to deliver the promise that the deal would have. So this is why I joined Gurney Point Capital. So I think the experience of being an investor was just a real eye-opener because the budget is a lot more constrained when you are in small companies or even in an investment fund than when you are in a large pharma company. So that was already
No. I just want to ask you to dig down on that, because when you've been in pharma, we quite often think about you as the buy side, right? And we think about farmers and investors all looking for assets. So did you have a very different way of looking at those opportunities as an investor versus when you'd been in pharma?
Yes, because as an investor, you have not only to be able to identify the attractive programs, but also to know from the start you're going to have to make money out of this investment. In pharma, you're looking to enrich the pipeline. And of course, the deal have to be, positive NPV and all of that. But if there is a extension in the budget, or if you have to think about differently on the funding, you're not going to be constrained. Whereas in an investment fund, it's all about, am I going to make money out of this opportunity? And oftentimes you have to have someone coming at the table at some point. So your judgment grid is actually pretty different, even if the economics have to be positive in all cases, obviously. So going to be an investor for a few years, and then I was tempted again to go back to, my first love, which is, developing a product and make it available to patients. So there was really no debate for me that when Ernesto approached me to review the strategy of Boston Pharmaceuticals and do whatever was needed in order to make it successful, I said yes immediately. I think I started actually at the late 21 in the role of BD support. So I moved from the investment fund to BD support, something I really knew to do. And then, over time, he asked me to be the CEO, and I took it with joy. And it was a huge challenge, but I was excited about it.
Now, when you started at Boston Pharma, there was a very, very busy pipeline. And the model that we wrote about back then was in licensing early stage assets, taking them through proof of concept. So you whittled down the pipeline quite fast. How did you make those decisions, and how did you end up selecting FGF21?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because, as you may remember, I never worked on MASH in Roche. It was not in our focus. So when I joined Boston Pharmaceuticals, there were, I think, between 7 and 10 assets. I don't quite remember, and I had to figure out, and they were in a bunch of preclinical, phase 1, even phase 2. So I really had to figure out what am I going to do with this pipeline. And I did what I know to do, what I've learned over, the 25 years in pharma that you mentioned, which may be closer to 35. But I did advisory boards, and I talked to customers, and I looked at market research, whatever had been done and whatever I could do with a limited budget, and took some very experienced advisors around me. And after that, it was quite clear that of all the assets we had, 4 were really attractive, and eventually one was clearly the leader in terms of potential, differentiation, and where we could take it. And this was the FGF21 analog, so agonist. So it was extremely progressive. It didn't go so fast as you mentioned. It took me maybe 9 months to focus the company. Then we had to focus the resources, think about changing, some of the people, and then come up with a smart and targeted development plan.
Okay, so let me just say, actually 9 months from where I sit and the things that I watch and see, 9 months is pretty fast, actually. So, a lot of companies take a lot longer to do strategy. I do want to get into some of the decisions you had to make about, your team and the structure of the company and so on. But it really sounds like you took the CEO role and then you rolled up your sleeves and did a lot of that work yourself. Is that correct? I mean, how different, again, I want to sort of get into when you were in a pharma company, you had like masses of people working with you. So how was that transition for you? And was it sort of like a type A thing? You had to do it yourself. How did you go about it?
Well, I love to work, Simone. So I'm not someone who is great in her office, waiting for things to come to her desk. I like to roll up my sleeves and smell a product for my own thing. Go to customers, look at market research. My last experiment at Roche in France, I attended a focus group on my last few days as the president of this huge company because I was just curious about, I forgot what product it was. So I tend to roll up my sleeves together with the teams. I don't do it alone. So in that particular case, I asked people to explain to me the product, and then there was no marketing. There was very limited business development, so someone had to do the work, and hiring people, developing them, and all of that at this stage where the company wouldn't have made any sense. So I did roll up my sleeve, but together with a team. There were a number of very talented individuals in the company that had joined right before me or had been longer there, and they were opening their books, collaborating with me. So it was actually a very exciting experience to go through reforecasting the company, reprioritizing it, and thinking it through. And I keep very good memories of a very challenging time, but where people rolled up their sleeves just with me as well. They were quite excited to see a direction where we would be going.
Yeah, I do want to get into the field itself in a minute, but I'm going to go back to my earlier question because I think for a lot of people out there, being a CEO, especially walking into a company, is different than starting one up yourself. Were there things you didn't anticipate? What were the sort of maybe biggest surprises for you walking into that, as you took on that role?
Well, I think, yeah. So when you've managed large companies in big pharma, everything is super clear from soup to nuts. Like there is a plan, you have a 5-year plan, everything is very robust. It may not fly and you may have to redo the whole thing, but someone has put together something super solid. In a biotech company, when you have a pipeline of 5 to 10 products, it's almost impossible to have a development plan integrated and CMC and forecast and the whole thing for each of those molecules. There is directional information, but not more than that. And the challenge of directional information is that, every dollar counts in the biotech. And if you take 5 to 10 molecules, directional isn't going to fly. So you have to go to the next level, and then you just don't have the resources to do this. So you ask people to stop their work and start doing development plan and this and that, and then next thing you know, the whole company gets into a stop, or you just start doing it with a limited number of people and try to do analogs and benchmarking. So this is the approach I took. But it is clear when you are a CEO of a biotech, you have to think through before you delegate something to people, because when they are working on something that is important for you, they're not working on something that is important for them. And if it's a great team, probably they know what they're supposed to be doing. So I always ask myself as a CEO, can I do this myself, or do I really need help? And if I need help, how much help actually do I need? So this is a very conscious decisions I made.
Great. So let's just talk a little bit about the journey, because there were, some critical points on that path. The field of MASH has undergone some big changes in the last few years. The first approval was Madrigal's Resdifra, and that works by a different mechanism. Now, I believe that you've been a longtime believer in FGF21. I mean, we've talked to you over the years about it. So, what did you see there? And, who did you have to convince?
Well, we saw the anti-fibrotic effect of FGF21 being extremely powerful. We had a very differentiated molecule being once a month with no immunogenicity. So this was also extremely impressive. And we had worked our CMC to excellence in terms of, whoever is going to have to manufacture and give this drug, have it available to patients. We really put a lot of thoughts in it. So we had to convince, first of all, we had to convince our board to do the right work in order to demonstrate the power of the data and in order to be able to develop the presentation and formulation to be truly best in class. So that was a very robust and productive dialogue with our board. We had a lot of support because, as you know, my chair was Elias Zerhouni, previous head of R&D at Sanofi, so a lot of knowledge there.
Previous NIH director.
Yeah, as well. And Ernesto Bertarelli, who is a family founder of Serono, an enormous knowledge in terms of manufacturing and an enormous understanding of customers. It was robust discussion, but I would say we were able to align pretty fast. And then after that, we went into fundraising, a lot of very good discussions. And then pharma discussions went in parallel. And then, the rest is history. The rest is history. Pharma accelerated conversations. And we're very excited to be the first deal in that class. Took it very well.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that because, I just want to emphasize that, as I said, MASH, which used to be called NASH, was a very difficult field for a long time, and there's certainly been an acceleration there. And the deal that you made was followed by a couple of others. 89 Bio was bought by Roche. Akero was bought by Novo Nordisk. And these are also FGF21 analogs. And I think the excitement is because these products work in late stage disease. I think Novo has talked about the potential to reverse disease. How do you've been very generous on LinkedIn saying that it's great for the field to have multiple deals and assets. How do you think about this, and how much room do you think there is for multiple products in this field?
Well, there is an epidemic of obesity. It hasn't gone away. people get on GLP and all other mechanism, the future will tell us how much people stay on them, how is the safety able to accompany patients over time. That I think is extremely important. But that being said, reversing fibrosis take a long time with the weight loss drugs. On the other hand, you have with the GLP-1 mechanism, within 24 weeks, you already have a massive reversal of the fibrosis. So we're talking about the ability to put back the liver to its initial stage over probably a year, 2 years, who knows, and the ability also to tackle much more severe patients, which are the cirrhotic patients. As you remember, we've talked about it, but MASH starts to be the number one reason for which people are getting a liver transplant. So the tsunami of patients having severe liver disease is massive, and I think there is enough room for the three mechanisms because also what happens with obesity is global, and it is now touching children. So we're talking about a very, very serious situation here.
Right. So let me sort of understand, because you're not saying that GLPs are going to replace FGF21s. Are you sort of, do you see a role for them complementary? Do you think there'll be combos?
Probably complementary. Hopefully there is some people who are going to be able to be really well treated with GLP. And if the fibrosis is early stage, if people stay long enough on the treatment, maybe that will have an effect, but mostly it will be in combination. And this is why some of the pharma are looking at this. So there is room for everybody. And I really hope of a future where people are going to be healthier in the way they behave. But at least these medicines are going to be able to at least attack the disease at the liver level, and then hopefully the metabolic as well. Because remember, the FGF21 have also a positive effect on the cardiometabolic profile of patients, which is incredibly important. So you hope people will also get on a diet and change the way they eat and all of that, but at least you want to reverse the disease at the liver, and as much as you can reverse the disease on the metabolic side.
And, there's obviously also new modalities coming into play. So we are seeing a fair amount of, activity. We're going to take a brief break now. And when we come back, we'll talk to some broader topics in drug development.
An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to new cos. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for new co-formation. Plus meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at BioCenturyEastWest.com.
We are back at the BioCentury Show with Sophie Kornowski, previously CEO of Boston Pharmaceuticals and a longtime BD executive with previously being head of partnering at Roche. Sophie, let's broaden the conversation and let's go to one of the favorite topics you and I have discussed over the years. In the first half, you talked about creating a best-in-class product. You and I talk a lot about first-in-class and best-in-class. How do you think about this? How much space, let's say, in this field is there for multiple entrants? You sort of seem to think there are a lot. But how do innovators balance this need to be first versus best? And, when you've been in pharma or as a CEO, talk a little bit about this first-in-class, best-in-class focus. What do farmers want? What do people really need to bring investors and say partners to the table?
Well, first in class is always pretty easy to think about because you're first, you're first. But you take a lot of risk with that. So, there is time where first in class gets everybody excited, but then the level of explanation you have to give to investor is really, really important. So as a small company, you have to have a lot of backing if you want to tackle first in class. I am used to first in class because in big pharma, this is really where you try to be. And I'm lucky I worked for amazing companies that had splendid R&D. And I had many times the opportunity to launch first in class assets, which is extremely exciting. That being said, best in class is also extremely interesting because you can build on what the others have missed, or you may be able to open the market in a different way. So either your features are what others haven't been able to achieve, or you open the market in a way that others have not done. And that may expand and make a huge difference for a large number of patients. For example, going from combination therapy to monotherapy or vice versa. Or better delivery system or combined products. So I have truly enjoyed the ability to go to the next level for patients. It's always about healthcare professional and patients. Are they going to be convinced? When you talk with them at the beginning, when you have your asset in mind, do they get excited? Do they see where to put the product? And if they do, then together you can get there. So I would say, I've done a best in class now, or would I hope, or at least has the potential to be best in class. I found this incredibly challenging and incredibly exciting, but I would say first in class is as exciting. So, if you ask me which one I prefer, I'm afraid I'm not able to tell you. The
Well,
one thing about best in class is you generally you have no choice. You're not first, so either
you
you're
have to
best
be
or
best, yeah.
you're a me too. And me
So,
too, I've never found that as exciting, I would
well,
say.
I'm gonna come to that, because so I can tell you that speaking with CEOs over the years, especially some who've taken a completely new technology, sometimes they've told me it's actually really hard to be the first and out there. Investors don't know what this new modality looks like. And so they just see so much risk there. So being out ahead of everybody is actually sometimes even harder. You might be better if there's like one or two, if you've got a competitor there.
Probably easier for large pharma to be first. And to be honest, that's what I
Because
have
it's
done.
not existential for them, but for a small company,
No,
it's
it is
existential.
every launch is existential, but you have massive amount of resources and people who've done it a lot. At Merck or Roche, it's a real school where you learn how to deal with the first in class. When you are a small biotech, your investors indeed are going to be scared.
So, do you have personal thoughts about this concept of herding? Like we've obviously the classical case is PD-1s, right? Everybody went after PD-1s. They sort of more PD-1s than the market could clearly tolerate. But we see that a lot with new targets that come up. We
Yeah.
see a lot of crowding into spaces. And, how do you know what's the right number? 6, 7, 8, 9? Is it okay to be number 10? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, who am I to criticize other people's strategy, honestly? But I would say we have a responsibility in the industry is to cure patients and to find solutions for deadly diseases or disease with huge burden. And if we are all doing the same thing, chances are we are letting aside other diseases. So, and then every company has all these experiments to do, all these clinical studies with patients, and it's not necessarily always fair to put patients in the clinical trial of a 15th compound in a class if everything has been demonstrated already, not to mention about the animal experiment that may also come ahead of time. So personally, I believe in working on differentiated products. So sometimes the 15th of the class can be differentiated. So I would not draw a hard line, but I do think there is something to think about. My experience is, however, that investors think it through. Uh, so most of the time, the feedback you get from investors will help you to decipher where you should be focusing.
So let's talk a little bit about the deal with GSK. Not so much the deal itself, but what it was like to sit on the other side of the table, having been the pharma side for all those years. How much did your experience at Roche and the other farmers before that make a difference in your ability to really navigate through that deal?
I think that I've been the one acquiring assets, so I knew the process. I knew all the things that could be asked, how serious those questions would be, and how much a small mistake can derail a deal. We used to say you have to forcefully align stars. We used to say that the beginning of a due diligence is always a disaster. So I knew what was going on the other side. And I also knew that transparency is critical. I was on another webcast just recently with French people, and I highlighted the importance of transparency, that you have as a small company to be transparent, and people at the other side of the table have to trust you. Otherwise, there can be no deal. So that I think that I was able to communicate to my team the importance of behaving accordingly. I
So,
also very much was part of the team because people get lost into details. Sometimes in a small biotech, you get bombarded with 1,000 questions, literally 1,000 questions. And if you are not disciplined, you can get completely lost. So we held hands together in the company. It was a very tight group throughout the many months of due diligence, which I think drove us to success.
and so, you've outlined some really interesting things there. Are there other sort of mistakes that that small companies make that you can tell the CEOs out there trying to get deals, trying to get on pharma dance cards? Are there typical things to avoid in these processes other than lack of transparency, which you just talked
Yeah.
about?
Well, I think, I don't believe that you have to call a CEO to get a deal done. I think it's actually a huge mistake to call the CEO because the CEO has other things to do, first of all. And secondly, the CEO should trust his teams. I don't believe in going up and hoping that the people who are in charge. I believe in processes. Processes are here to simplify the life of large companies. They also are a way for the biotech company to be organized in the way it's having the dialogue with the pharma company. So that is, for me, a very important point. And then I believe in not being arrogant. You get a question you don't like, fine. You take a deep breath and you answer with open hands. It's the same with investors, actually. You have to hear yourself. When you are in those calls, you have to have the ability to be in the call and answer whatever is being asked, but also have the ability to listen to how you are actually answering. And also have enough confidence in the team so that you give each other feedback. So that you try to be really good. You have to play your A game for 9 months, nonstop.
Well, all right. So, just we're coming to an end, but I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about China. So we've just come back. I've just come back from BioCentury's China Healthcare Summit in Shanghai. It's the 12th year we've done it. We've just seen, an incredible interest. I feel that 2025 is probably the year that biotech woke up to China. Many people in the West, and yet when we're there, huge enthusiasm, but we do see, and I see it also here to some degree, biotech's actually not really realizing that the assets coming out of China are quality assets, are competitive assets to them. How do you think about the kind of innovation and competition and deal making coming out of China? Is that something that's on your radar? And when you talk with investors and, biotechs in Europe, where you are now, and in Boston, is that front of mind for them?
Yeah, well, I hear from large pharma a great excitement about assets coming from China, and for sure these assets look like they are competitive and first in class and all of that. I think there is only so much pressure and stress a CEO in the US or Europe can have. It's a bit like when you pass an exam, you can't worry about all the competitors that may be coming up. So I would say today, possibly companies don't worry so much about the assets from China because they have their own work to tackle. But it is clear that China is coming to the table. I am not working with any Chinese company, but I am hearing it and feeling it and reading it on what's going on in pharma companies. So that is a reality.
And just one last question on that. We've seen this big Innovent deal last week with Takeda. We've seen a few very big deals, and in the West, we look for bellwethers that really might turn into the next Vertex or Regeneron, previously Amgen and Biogen. Really becoming big biotechs. Do you think that kind of part of the ecosystem will also be filled by China companies? Do you think that we're likely to see more big biotechs based in other regions of the world, notably China?
I think it all depends what's going on with pricing in the US and some of the regulation changes that could happen. So it's early days to say this. It's also a question of who is going to be the smartest in how to apply AI, how people are going to be disciplined enough to actually not only talk about AI, but implement it to results. It's still early days. Everybody has some AI injected into their pipeline or their thinking, but we don't have a lot of product coming out of that or a lot of strategy coming out of that, or at least it's not being so communicated. So I think these are the two things, the pricing and the regulation, as well as application of AI into pipelines. Whoever does it the best will probably have a chance to have large biotech. That being said, I think pharma will continue to be on the acquiring front. So I do think that, we're going to continue to see consolidation, but hopefully, acquisition is a great thing. Integration is the most important thing. To do well the integration, you remain very humble when you think of how companies are integrated. So more to come and better to do that, I think, would be the transformation in this industry.
Well, I look forward to continuing that conversation as we'll watch what unfolds there. This has been great, and I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Sophie.
Thank you, Simone. It was a pleasure.
Brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. In March, explore how to globalize Asia innovation and connect with key players across Asia's innovation arc, from India to China to Japan.